Hello, Brubs. We're back with The Beautiful Side of Evil by Johanna Michaelsen. It's a 1982 book dealing with her forays into the occult when she was younger. She later became an evangelist, I believe. As I said, I try not to read about the people I read on here just because it leaves an element of surprise. 8. Angry Shadows. In April, I decided to adopt the snake. I made this momentous decision while I was still nursing several badly bruised ribs, acquired by falling off the stage at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. on the 27th of March, 1971. We had entered the American College Theater Festival months before with an unusual production of an old German play called Wojciech. Our show was selected one of the 10 best out of 240 colleges all over the country, a fact which gave us the honor of performing at Ford's Theater. Opening night, the lights dimmed on cue at the end of the fourth scene and then unexpectedly blacked out. I got turned around in the darkness and walked straight off the end of the stage. Somehow I landed on the only flat unit in the orchestra pit. If I had gone several inches in either direction, I would have tripped over a footlight and landed on the edge of some open unit, which quite possibly would have killed me. As it was, the fall knocked my breath out. The pain on my right side was paralyzing, so I simply lay there for about 15 minutes wondering if I could be seen from the front rows. I hoped not. All the critics were in the front rows. When I had caught my breath, I pulled myself back on stage during another scene change and finished the show. Several years later, I saw a newspaper article which mentioned that many performers had suffered strange accidents on that stage, especially in the path Booth had followed in his attempted escape after Lincoln's assassination. Where I had fallen was directly in the path shown on their diagram. Mama flew in from Mexico to take care of me. I don't know how I would have made it through that time without her. There was no more comforting hand in the world to me than my mother's. After several weeks, I was able to fend for myself again, and she returned to Mexico. That was when I decided to adopt the snake, not as a replacement for my mother, I hasten to add. Besides, rehearsing Cleopatra's death scene for acting class without the benefit of an asp seemed futile. What do you got, bruv? And Professor Benicroft said live props were always helpful. Oddly enough, Barney's Animal Kingdom pet store was fresh out of asps. They did, however, have a beguiling South American baby boa. He was only 19 inches long and had the loveliest pattern on his back, so I named him Quetzal. No, I can't say it. Quetzalcoatl, and took him home around my neck. I know that's not how you say it. I can't remember how to say it though. On the way to my dorm, I ran into Adam. He was enthralled with my new pet and immediately proceeded to the workshop. After almost 2 hours of sawing and hammering, he presented the creature with a wooden cage. It had a leather shoulder strap so I could carry him with me, and a screen on one side so he could look out. It was fully equipped with a little tub of water and tree branch. Reactions to my pet were varied. He was either immediately accepted and cuddled, or more frequently greeted with short shrieks of ghastly recognition, as, for example, in the case of our teacher with whom I stopped to talk one afternoon. The days were still cold, so as usual, I let the thing wrap himself around my neck to keep warm. In the middle of the conversation, she stopped to admire my necklace. My, isn't that an unusual piece of jewelry you're wearing? Her fingers reached out to sample the unfamiliar texture. Quetzalcoatl lifted his head and flicked his little tongue at her. The ensuing scream turned heads halfway across campus. My rendition of Cleopatra improved not at all with the acquisition of the baby boa, but it did start a fad on campus that lasted several months. More important to me, however, Quetzalcoatl was something alive to care for and love. Many I know will refuse to believe this, but boas have lovely personalities. Well, South American boas, anyway. Central American boas have ticks and bites. Over a period of weeks, he learned to recognize my scent with his flicking tongue and would make his way around my desk, across my desk, to wrap himself around my arm, something he did for no one else. Of course, there may have been no one else he wanted to throttle either. Granted, a snake was a far cry from my first choice for a pet. I would infinitely have preferred a fluffy kitten, but I never would have gotten away with a cat in the dorm. I suspected correctly that the girls would be somewhat less inclined to reveal the presence of a pet snake to the house mother for fear the thing would perhaps somehow appear under their pillow one night. I also fancied I also I also fancied Quetzalcoatl offered me some modicum of protection. You see, word had gotten out, I'm sure I don't know how, that the bite of this boa, unlike that of all others, was endowed with poison, which, although mild, could prove fatal to some. I soon was given wide berth on my late night wanderings. The summer of 1970 found me desperately trying to put together a theater course I could take. I needed to add several extra credits required by the University of North Carolina, but I didn't want to stay in the States to get them. So, Mother and I went to the University of the Americas in Cholula, Puebla, a town of crumbling pyramids and 365 churches, which was located at the foot of two awesome snow capped volcanoes. The depressing saga of that summer, like my ballet fiasco of earlier days, is best left untold. Not unexpectedly, in light of my last college transfer, the theater courses offered in Cholula were suddenly canceled due to technical difficulties beyond their control. The teacher quit. The long and short of it is that at the end of the term, with the help of my parents and a wonderful lady soon dubbed Mama Clarine Furrow, I produced, directed, and starred in a public performance of Miss Julie in exchange for the needed credits. Considering most of the cast had either defected to go sightseeing or had gotten themselves arrested for various and sundry ridiculous reasons, the show was really not half bad, except perhaps for the scene in which Daddy tried to create the illusion of gaily dancing peasants all by himself. Finally, the summer was over and I hadn't jumped into a volcano. My first night back in Chapel Hill, I hurried out to collect a small bouquet of leaves and flowers to give to Professor Koch. It was past midnight when I made my way to the theater and unlocked the doors. As usual, I slipped in quickly, locked the doors behind me, and groped my way through the dark little lobby to the light switch at the entrance of the auditorium. There was a soft click on pale lights flooded the stage. There was a soft click as pale lights flooded the stage. I'm back, I called out softly. Professor Koch, I've come back. Here, I brought you your flowers. I placed the small bouquet on the stage. Silence. Professor, can you hear me? I've come back. The atmosphere began to swirl and thicken as though a great storm was about to break around me. Professor, are you here? I stood on the stage and looked out over the auditorium, my voice tense. The inner swinging doors of the theater began to thud against the large front panels I had just locked. Not the gentle sound which frequently announced the arrival of the professor, but violent, angry, threatening to shatter them into 1,000 pieces. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the banging stopped. Dead silence, and then an overpowering presence of evil rushed into the theater and flooded around me. A voice, low and tense, quivering with rage, spoke inside my head. Where were you? You left me. You brought me no green thing to place upon my stage. Where were you? Professor Koch, I'm sorry I had to go away for the summer. Don't you remember? I came to say goodbye when I left. Why are you so angry? You left me, the low voice hissed back. You brought me nothing living, nothing green. I'm sorry. Look, see, I've brought you flowers now. See, here they are. I lifted the bouquet for him to see and placed it on the stage again. Leave me. I do not wish you with me now. It was the imperious voice of an angry lover, outraged by my neglect, and in need of time to heal the wound. I'm sorry, Professor Koch. I'm sorry. There were tears in my eyes. May I come back later? The only reply was a stony silence. I left the theater confused and frightened. For almost 2 weeks I visited the theater only in daylight. I took a daily offering of green things, which I placed beneath the stage, and after a while I sensed he was no longer angry with me. And yet there was no longer that total acceptance of before. Now, sometimes when I would rise and go to the theater, in the dead of night or in the early hours before dawn, I was greeted frequently by a barrier, invisible but as solid as though a web of rubber netting had been stretched across the entrance. I thought this was just temporary. Professor was still upset. He would get over it. Then, several months later, the final break came. It was during the running of a comedy called The Knack. Kavan was stage manager for the play. I was busy with some obscure experimental show which was rehearsing at Graham Memorial. After my rehearsal, I would walk over to Playmakers to watch the last act and help Kavan lock up the theater. Then we would sit by the stage and talk for a while before he would walk me home. Several nights into the performance, after everyone had left, Kavan flopped his long frame down into a seat in the front row and stretched his legs out on the ledge of the stage. God, I'm exhausted, he sighed. I can't wait for this show to be over. What's the matter, Kavan? Didn't things go well tonight? I asked him, sinking down into the seat on his right. Oh, no, worse than usual. Guess I'm just tired. I don't blame you, I sighed. This isn't exactly my favorite kind of comedy either. But at least you're working with a major production, I added wistfully. Yeah, I suppose so, but you wouldn't believe some of the silly things that have been going on backstage here. He was about to explain when something caught my eye to the left of the auditorium. Behind him, I stared as Kevin continued speaking. His voice seemed to be coming from very far away. The form of a young soldier in a dark uniform began to materialize. He couldn't have been more than 17 or 18 years old. He was huddled on the floor by the wall, his whole body shaken by sobs that were now faintly audible to me. His head turned and he looked straight into my eyes, tears streaming down his face. He was clutching his right hip, and suddenly I gasped in pain. Kavan stopped talking and looked at me. What's the matter, Johanna? His alarmed voice was still far away. Kavan, look, I said slowly. Kavan followed my eyes to the point in the aisle where I was staring. What are you talking about? Look at what? Can't you see him, Kavan? There's a young soldier there. He's crying. I can feel the pain in my hip. Don't you see him? Ah, look, Joe, I think it's time to go. Come on. Kavan stood up, but he's crying. He needs to say something to me. It's time to go, Johanna. Kavan's voice was firm. I'm leaving now. Are you coming? Suddenly I felt afraid. I remembered Professor's anger towards me, and I didn't want to be in the theater alone tonight. I got up to leave. I looked again at the young soldier. As quickly as he had come, he began to fade, his face bitter, resentful, full of pain. He needed to speak, and I had chosen not to stay. I had missed the moment. It was too late. Yes, yes, let's go. The next night I met Kavan backstage. I won't be a minute, Joe, he said, just going downstairs to lock up. Want to come down with me? No, you go ahead. I'll wait for you here. I was hoping the young soldier would return. Kavan went below while I walked about the stage. There was an old cot on the set, and I stretched out on it to rest for a moment. I felt so tired. I should have stayed last night to speak with him, I said to myself. Are you still here? The auditorium grew suddenly cold as my eyes wandered across the seats to the lighting booth above. A tall, pitch black figure filled the booth. I whirled around on the cot as Kavan's footsteps came running up from beneath the stage. The figure faded and disappeared. Kavan, I think I saw someone in the light booth. I forced my voice to sound calm. He gave me a strange look, but went up to check. He waved and called down to me from the booth. No one here. He was back a minute later. Are you okay? You've been acting awfully strange lately. Are you sick? No, no, I'm fine. Let's go get some coffee, I answered, but I felt cold and afraid. The figure had seemed hostile and threatening. I went back again to the theater the following night, though, determined not to be scared away. I went down front as usual to wait for Kavan. The theater was ominously still. I'm not going to let you get the better of me, I said softly as I stepped onto the stage. This is as much my theater now as it is yours, Professor. I don't know if it's you trying to frighten me or if someone else has moved in, but it doesn't matter. I belong here too. Intense, vicious hatred rushed upon me, almost sucking the air from my lungs. Then above me a rustling sound, a dark hooded form, a hideous contorted face, gleaming dead white, sprawled down on the grid over my head. Enormous long eyes glinted bright shiny green, like the eyes of a wild maddened animal. Dark arms hung down, reaching for me. I backed slowly to the wall, fighting for breath. My mouth opened in a scream that would not come. Johanna, what's the matter? Kavam was standing before me. The pressure lifted and air rushed back into my lungs. Oh God, Kavan, there's someone up in the grid. I saw him. There's no one up there, Joe. His voice was openly exasperated. Just then we heard two footsteps on the iron walkway above us. You're right, there is someone up there. He rushed up the ladder into the dimly lit walkway above the stage. I could hear the ringing of his footsteps as he searched the entire area. Then he was back, his face white. Let's get out of here. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the fresh night air. Beck grinned as he saw us. Hey, what timing? He exclaimed as he crossed the street. I was hoping I'd find you here. Beck, listen, weird things are happening in there. Joe's upset. Take her for some coffee, will you? I've still got to lock up. Of course, Beck said, taking my arm. Are you all right? He asked me gently. Yes, yes, I'm fine now, Beck, thank you. I'll walk her home, Kavan, he said softly. Ah, yeah, okay. I've got some studying to do anyway. Good night, Joe. Good night. Beck took my hand and guided me across the street. A car stopped to let us pass. I glanced up as we walked by and froze. The face in the car seemed to become the face I had just seen in the theater. I knew it couldn't be, but my nerves finally reached their snapping point. As the car drove by, I began to scream. Beck held me a long time as I sobbed, terrified and helpless and broken-hearted. Professor hated me. I no longer belonged. Dear gentle Beck, he seemed to be endowed with some sort of superhuman patience. At a time when I was most alone, most vulnerable, he stood by and helped me keep a grasp on sanity. He had been right. I needed him very much now. Even Paula, my roommate, had moved out after leaving me a 3-page typed letter about how impossibly morbid, inconsiderate, theatrical, and bizarre I was. I would take you places with me more often if it weren't for the fact that I always have to explain you afterwards. I'm sure she was right. I never went into that theater again except to attend classes. I never again took Professor anything living and green. One night, several weeks after the final incident in the theater, a number of us gathered in Jack and Adam's room to talk and listen to music. Beck and I were on some drug or other, a gentle kind of non-hallucinatory drug. The second of only 4 trips. I felt calm and mellow as I leaned back on his shoulder and waited for the music. We had been promised something different that night, a new musical or the life of Jesus called Jesus Christ Superstar, Rock was by no means a favorite of mine, but I was delighted with the songs, even though it was obvious to me the composer's picture of a high voiced, wimpy Jesus couldn't possibly be correct. Nevertheless, as the drug began to take effect, it seemed to me that I was suddenly there, an active participant, in the drama of his life, there as he was betrayed, there as he was mocked, and oh God, as he was beaten with a whip that seemed to cut into my own flesh with every crack. There as his hands and feet were hammered to the cross. For the first time in my life, I became acutely, overwhelmingly aware that Jesus had really lived, had really experienced death on a cross. The first week I had been at Wesleyan, a girl named Nancy shared a little booklet called The Four Spiritual Laws with me, and I had asked Jesus to become part of my life. For a few months afterwards, things seemed better. I always kept my Bible near and often read from the book of Psalms to quiet my spirit when I felt myself surrounded by evil. I quickly found, however, that reading the New Testament seemed to precede an especially violent and frightening attack from the beings around me, so I began to avoid it. It was my love of God, however, that kept me from actively seeking to develop the psychic powers I knew I had. A voice deep inside me would say, "No, don't. It will hurt God if you do." As the last strains of Superstar came to a close, I opened my eyes. I was alone. Everyone had left. I found Beck downstairs in the lounge. He had been unable to bear the pain of listening to the suffering of Jesus. We both decided we must find out more about this man. We began going to church early Sunday mornings. Several months later, we had an encounter with deity. We had been at what had been we had been at what had inadvertently become an all-night theater troupe party. The music was mellow, the conversations deep, and no one wanted to go home. Mescaline, pot, and hash flowed freely through the group. Before dawn, Beck and I asked a friend for a ride into town so we could attend the early chapel service. Our request elicited numerous moans and groans and comments of, "I don't believe it." But we got our ride and arrived in time. We sat in the dimly lit chapel, empty but for 5 or 6 women, and waited for the comforting, soothing words of the Anglican prayer book to be spoken. With no warning, my heart began to pound and my eyes filled with tears. I felt suddenly as though the eye of God, stern and awful, had broken through a cloud and was gazing down at me, at once loving and severe. Why do you do this to yourself? Don't you know the harm you're bringing your spirit and body with those drugs? The thought seemed to flow from the plain brass cross on the altar. Don't you know I love you? I hid my face in my hands and wept silently. Later, as we walked down the gray, quiet street, Beck took my hand. God doesn't want us to take drugs again, does he? I looked up surprised. You felt it too? He nodded. It's going to be hard. He was right. It was hard. But even though I still went to the evening gatherings of the Thespian clan, I never touched drugs again. My lifestyle on the surface changed dramatically. An acid head friend stole the copy of the Jerusalem Bible as a gift for us. We never did find out from where. Beck and I began to spend long hours reading it aloud to one another. Or rather, Beck spent the hours reading it out loud to himself. I soon encouraged him to read instead from Tolkien's Ring trilogy when we were together. Somehow I couldn't bear to hear the sound of the words from the New Testament for very long. The euphoria I had felt when listening to Superstar had become a black depression from which I could see no exit. I no longer went to the theater, but I still frequented the graveyard and little chapel. Now hardly a night passed when dark figures did not wake me, softly whispering words in a language I couldn't understand. Breathing their chill, foul breath on my face, pressing iron fingers across my arms and chest. As I walked at night, trees became gruesome, grotesque shapes, covered with evil eyes. watching, waiting. Every time I crossed the street, my heart pounded in terror for fear the demons would force some driver's hand to run me down. Thoughts of death and intense rage filled my mind, and I covered my journal with passages from Medea, the Bacchae, the Bad Seed, and the tortured poems of Edgar Allan Poe. Half a dozen times I started up the hill to see one of the local psychiatrists, and as many times stopped partway up, certain there was little they could do. The source of my problem wasn't psychological, it had its origin in a very different place. Yet there was no one to whom I could turn to set me free. No one, perhaps, but God, and He seemed so far from me. My heart longed for Him, cried out for Him, but something barred my way. Weeping, I would fall to my knees. My God, why hast Thou forsaken me? Why art Thou so far from helping me? And from the words of my roaring, oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but Thou hearest not. And in the night season, and them not silent. Psalm 22, 1-2 KJV. Then at night the evil beings would return, and even my frantic whispering of the 23rd Psalm would not make them fade. Oh God, why couldn't I, as the psalmist, fear no evil as I walked through the endless valley of the shadow of death? Why was there no comfort for me in his rod and staff? And I would run to gentle Beck, and he would hold me until my sobbing quieted. When, in the winter of 71, he asked me to marry him, I said yes. Good old gentle Beck. And that's the end of chapter 8, Brubs. Oh, man.